All right, so welcome to beyondpowerandcontrol.com. I'm Sybil Cummin, licensed professional counselor and approved clinical supervisor and creator of Beyond Power and Control. Today, we are lucky to have Christine Garcia with us to help us explore some of the myths and misconceptions of domestic violence in victims and survivors. So Christine is a licensed professional counselor who is EMDR certified, and she is the co-owner of the Children's Wellness Center of Colorado, which is located in Centennial, Colorado. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is such a great opportunity and I appreciate it.
So yeah, if you can give us a little bit of background about your experience and the Children's Wellness Center of Colorado, that would be great.
Great, yes. So I started off my career in Child Protective Services. And even before that, have a little bit of experience at mental health centers and just different things that as you start to get into this field, you build your experience with some of these really various opportunities to grow in your clinical skills. So I have a background in kind of some different things before I found myself working with victims of domestic violence through my internship program and my master's while I was getting my master's degree. So as I started walking into this field and recognizing what domestic violence was, I was able to do shelter hotline work and advocacy for a victim service provider in Douglas County, the Crisis Center. From there, I grew into opportunities to do victim advocacy for a domestic violence offender treatment provider. They used to be an agency called Amend, which was the only nonprofit domestic violence offender treatment program in Colorado. They since unfortunately have closed. But that gave me another unique perspective in working with victims. I also have facilitated the Denver Metro Domestic Violence Fatality Review Committee, which was a committee charged with looking at themes and commonalities in domestic violence specific homicides. And we looked at cases where it was the victim that was murdered or also collateral deaths, so children, police officers, others that would come to assist. We were really looking for red flags and risk factors that could help us to better understand what circumstances presented or what red flags would show up when there was the possibility of a fatality related to domestic violence. But alongside all of that, I was also working on my licensure and building a private practice to work with all different individuals, but found myself primarily drawn to working with victims of domestic violence. And during that time, have moved from individual solo practice to a group practice, which is where I am today. So myself and Amber Bukowski, who's a licensed clinical social worker, opened the Children's Wellness Center of Colorado in June of 2016. And really our vision is to serve as many family members as possible in one location. So we work with children, adolescents, and their parents and caregivers, as well as adults without children, really seeking to remove barriers for multiple family members to get their needs met. We find that oftentimes we'll get a call for either a parent who's looking for services for themselves or a parent who's looking for services for their child, but through talking with them, the whole family has experienced a trauma or a length of period of time where there was trauma, such as domestic violence occurring, and everyone that's been victimized really needs the support. And so by having them be able to all come to one location, it really allows us to coordinate session times and things like that allow people to get the services and support that they need. We also find that as parents get the support that they need to heal from their trauma, that also further influences their children in a positive way in their own healing. So that's who we are and what we do.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think removing barriers to treatment is one of the reasons I am really passionate about working with this population and why I've started Beyond Power and Control. And so, yeah, finding those models that work to really support the whole family are unfortunately tough to find, but we are glad you are here.
Yes.
So yeah, I think one of the myths and misconceptions that is out there about victims and survivors is that they are helpless and weak and don't really have any skills to do life. And so what do you see from clients that come in, and how can we kind of share this with clinicians so that they have a greater perspective on these clients when they come in?
Yeah, so this is something I'm really passionate about. And I think my passion has grown because of the experiences that I've had watching. And I'm, for myself, I work primarily with women. I also have some adolescent clients, but almost all of my caseload are female. So as I'm talking today, I just want to acknowledge that there are men and boys that are victims of and exposed to domestic violence, but that from my experience, I mostly am an expert in working with women who are survivors. So I'll be using the pronoun she as I refer to my clients. But I find that when women come in to work with me, that they are kind of a shell of who maybe they once were. This is not always true, and I think everything is on a continuum. So for some people, they are really, really hurting and really have had their sense of self destroyed by the perpetrator. And for other people, they've been able to keep some more of that intact. But whenever we think of victims of domestic violence, we think oftentimes of people who are weak or meek or unable to stand up for themselves, unable to advocate for themselves. And sometimes that is the person that is walking into our office because they've been really torn down by the perpetrator, and kind of their way of seeing who they are, similar to many victims of trauma, but with domestic violence, they're often living with the perpetrator day in, day out, hearing messages over and over and over again that really destroy their sense of self. And so they walk in with sort of this sense of themselves that they are nothing, or they have nothing to offer, or they, I've had clients say things like, I don't even know how to articulate myself anymore, because the way I articulate myself is always misunderstood. And so they have trouble even speaking up, for themselves in particular situations. But what happens over time, in my experience, is that as women reclaim their sense of self and they reclaim the parts of themselves that were lost within the context of this abusive relationship, they are women that have many strengths, and often even their victimization has made them stronger. They are, as they become more empowered and assert themselves as a capable and, not just capable, but also a person that has a lot to offer to the world, to their children, to their work environment, to their friends. I see women come out of this who are incredibly strong. And I think it's our job as clinicians to help to remember that when they come in, particularly a shell of who they once were, that's not a clear representation of who they are. Because if we stay stuck in seeing them as meek, weak, incapable, or helpless, we really aren't going to be able to help them assert themselves, or re-see themselves as the people that they were before the abuse, and now the person that they are emerging and becoming as they grow from the experience of being in an abusive relationship.
Yeah. And I really think it's important for clinicians to remember that it's not our job to make choices for these clients.
Yeah.
And that if we do kind of have that in the back of our mind, or we truly believe that misconception that they are weak and helpless, us as helping professionals want to take care of and we can take on the role of power and control in their life by making choices for them. If we just hold on to that belief that they do not have strengths and they cannot do this. And so it's really important for us to change, I think, this perception so that we sit back and allow them to develop their strengths and we don't take over.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. Because I do think we have the tendency they've been convinced oftentimes that they are just not able to make these decisions, or they don't have the, intelligence or whatever it is that the perpetrator has attacked them on to really make, change that perspective of themselves and the sense that they are capable. I think that if we assume that they are more than capable and that they, in fact, the very fact that they've been able to survive, I mean, that's what defines a survivor. They've survived this experience. They've been able to use some skills to do that. And those are the things that we want to start searching for and capitalizing on, and really digging, not even digging sometimes, but just asking questions that really allow them to recognize their own strengths. And
I was going to say, so are there specific questions that you really are drawn to, or specific things that therapists can do that maybe are not as confident working with this population to start to nurture these strengths within their clients?
Yeah. So first of all, I think having the foundation or the perspective that they can make the decision, right? That they can make their choices for themselves, and that just like with all of our clients, that they are the expert on their situation. So even with the expertise and experience that I have, I always tell my clients, you are the expert. You tell me what you think is the right decision here, and we'll weigh the pros and cons, and we'll look at the potential safety issues that might accompany whatever decision. But ultimately, I'm just guiding a process that allows them to find that choice within themselves, because they're the expert on this other person that they've been with as well. So if we treat them as the expert, and we really ask questions that allow them to utilize and capitalize on that expertise. So if a client, for example, is saying to me, well, what do you think that I should do? Or, they'll say kind of self-deprecating things such as, well, I really don't think that I can articulate to my caseworker, for example, if they're involved with the Department of Human Services. I can't articulate to the caseworker that I want to have, more time with my child, or that I made this decision because of X, Y, and Z. Can you say it for me? Do you think that you can do that for me? Then I say back to them, I believe that you can do this. And I think that I've already seen, XYZ strength in you. Whatever it is that I've noticed that's really true about who they are as a person outside of this experience of domestic violence, the strengths that they have that they can capitalize on then to make that step towards something that might be a little bit scary or difficult for them. And I try to look for, and like the intake paperwork, I have an area that really asks them to identify what some of their strengths are. And if they don't write anything down, or if there's only one thing written, I do spend some time in the intake talking more about that. So I noticed that you only wrote down that one of your strengths is that you do a good job taking care of your kids. Tell me more about what you do every day to take care of your kids, and really starting to open up some questions and some conversation, and explaining to them, I want to know the whole view of you. I don't want to just focus on this period of time in your life where victimization has happened, or what the victimization has led you to today, because I know that you are more than that. And so sometimes we'll kind of look for things that, prior to getting in a relationship with this person, what was their life like? What were they doing? Those kinds of things that really allow us to look at all of the things that they bring to their life that are benefits.
And do you ever see, I see a lot of clients that feel so ashamed about the ways that they survived, the things that they did to make things less explosive in the home or to keep their children safe. Do you find ways to let them see that those things were also strengths?
Absolutely.
Their survival process.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, even being able to remind them, like, you survived. Whatever it is that you did that allowed you to survive, we don't know what could have happened if things would have been different. It's easy to sit here now and reflect on the situation and say, could have, should have, would have, right? And a lot of people do that to victims also. Oh, you should have done this or you should have done that. But we have to remember that in that moment, they were using every single part of their brain, their reptilian brain, their, what they know of this perpetrator, what they know about how he or she reacts to them when they, whether they scream or they turn completely quiet or they run away or they don't, whatever it was that they did to survive the situation, it kept them and their children alive. And so ultimately we have to celebrate that, and we have to remind them how important it was. I find this true for victims of lots of different types of traumas, that they blame themselves or think, if I would have just done this or that, it would have been better. And we always assume that it would have been better. And what I try to remind clients about is we don't know if it could have been worse. You did what you had to do in that moment based on the knowledge that you had at the time. And ultimately, you have to celebrate that because you survived it.
And also then kind of bringing that into the current is they're doing what they need to do right now by seeking therapy, by having their children in therapy, so that they can continue to grow and grow those strengths. And so, yeah, they did what they had to do then, and they're doing what they have to do now as well.
Absolutely. And sometimes that also, is a reason that victims might do things that we don't quite understand or may seem on the surface counterintuitive to what we might advise them, right? Which hopefully nobody's specifically advising their clients what to do when they are dealing with domestic violence, but rather leading a process so that they can decide what is the safest option for them. But ultimately, if they, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, Sybil. What were you just?
We're just talking about kind of what they're doing now is also their kind of their survival, and they're doing what they have to do now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that victimization does not stop post separation, and oftentimes can actually increase in intensity, get worse, and that there's more risk to the victim. So while it might seem that certain things are counterintuitive for us, when we talk to the victim more about why they're doing what they're doing, excuse me, battling a little bit of a cold here at the end, that we actually find that they that their choices are many times based on doing what they think is the most safe or what will continue to diffuse a certain situation. So, I think the most important thing is, like you were saying, recognizing that they're still doing what they have to do to survive post-separation, especially if they have children with this person, because they will continue to be most likely in contact with them based on the way that our current family court system is
not quite set up to support these survivors.
Right. Thank you.
Put it nicely.
Yes.
So my goal again with setting up Beyond Power and Control is to really start to educate mental health clinicians, caseworkers, attorneys, people that will come into contact with these women and men that experience domestic violence. And so, because unfortunately there's not a lot of training available, I think I had 30 minutes in my graduate program, in the whole program on domestic violence. And so what do you think would be maybe the top 2 or 3 takeaways for clinicians who are not well experienced in this specific population, but will come into contact with these clients? They will be on their caseloads, maybe in a community mental health setting where they don't have any say on what clients they see.
Yeah.
Or that, a client is coming into their private practice because they know that this person does trauma work and they have experienced trauma. Or even the couples therapist who is going to see this couple together and not maybe realize that there's domestic violence present. What do you think the kind of top couple of takeaways for clinicians would be specific to this misconception.
Gosh, only 2 or 3. Okay. So I would say that first and foremost, that there are always strengths, and that if you take a strength-based perspective, your client will be able to show that to you. And they may not be able to articulate that for you. They may not be able to, like, I was talking about in the intake session, they may not be able to provide a full list on your intake form of what their strengths are. But if you believe that they have strengths, and you believe that they are capable and strong and amazing, they will show you that. So if we can start from that place of taking that perspective, I think that lays a foundation to then take the next step towards supporting their own empowerment. And by supporting their own empowerment, we're not making decisions for them. We're not telling them what to do. We're not stepping in and rescuing them from difficult situations. That doesn't mean we can't be with them, support them, help them to prepare for, a difficult conversation, or prepare for a court hearing or something like that. But we don't have to do it for them. And really, setting up the idea too that there is hope. I think for a lot of my clients, part of this sense of helplessness that can kind of come into the room sometimes is that they've lost hope. And they've lost hope for good reason. The systems, like Sybil mentioned, are not always set up to support victims in the way that their mental health would require. They're not always set up to protect them, and they're not always set up in ways that allow them to get justice. And so sometimes they have lost hope. And I have found myself in the past slipping into this idea that, oh my gosh, this really is a hopeless situation. There's nothing else that can be done, because it can get overwhelming. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I have to remember, no, wait a minute. I have to be the hope. I have to be the one that can bring that back into the room, because that's what they're not going to be able to, right? So I look for those opportunities for hope and start to remind them that even the fact that they no longer have to live in a home daily where they're being abused, and their children, most likely, even if they do have to have contact with that perpetrator, they're also with the non-offending parent and able to have opportunities to be away from that abuse for periods of time, that those are the pieces of hope, that they are shifting the tide, and they are creating a new trajectory for their own lives and those of their children.
Yeah, and again, there is hope, and I think it takes kind of our work and kind of being well educated as a mental health profession on working with this population, and then I think long-term advocacy with the other systems that these women and men are going to come into contact with. Is really important. But what we can do, because it can get so overwhelming if you look at the system and you look at not guilty verdicts, or you look at 50-50 decision making when you feel in your gut things are not safe for this child that way. It can be so overwhelming, and we can slip into that as well. And so we can do this. Sorry, my computer just did something really weird.
Me too.
So hopefully it is still working. It says still recording.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just want to thank you in case our computers go to craziness.
Okay.
Thank you for adding your expertise and your compassion for this population to Beyond Power and Control. And hopefully we will get to hear more from Christine in the future.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.